The secret magic word. Recognized by many as the world's greatest fisherman, I'm often asked how I managed to catch so many enormous fish. Naturally, I've kept my method secret. That is, until now. Lucky you, today, I'm going to finally share the exact details on an extraordinary fishing technique that guarantees you'll land the largest fish in any water. Here's the backstory. It all started in Montana 20 years ago. Old Barry Baker and I had gone up to the Big Horn to do a little trout fishing. It wasn't our first trip to the river, but this occasion was particularly memorable. It had been mid-September, Indian summer, and there hadn't been a cloud in the sky. The cottonwoods were painted yellow, and the warm autumn air smelled of wood smoke, sage, and dry oak leaves. After launching the old Mackenzie boat from below the Yellowtail Dam, we took turns rowing and fishing. We were alone on the river. The only sounds were the soft dip of the oars and the whistle of the fly line. It was a near-perfect day. The only problem, the fishing had been a little slow. Mind you, we'd caught a few, but hadn't landed anything worth a photo. When I complained about this unfortunate fact, old Barry Baker said he would share a real special secret if I promised never to tell a soul. He claimed an old Indian medicine man living over in Crow Agency had given him a secret magic word that made big fish jump right into the boat. Skeptical, I chuckled and told him he best sit down in the shade. To my surprise, he said, "If you don't believe it, I'll prove it." Then the darn fool put down his rod, leaned over the gunnel, stuck his whole head under the water and murmured something into the depths. When Barry came back up, head and shoulders dripping wet, I started to laugh so hard I nearly fell out of the boat. After wiping the water off his brow, Baker said, "Just wait. This usually takes a few seconds to work." Then, after a count of 5, it happened. What must have been an 8-pound brown trout leaped out of the river and landed in my lap. The fish was a lunker. For those unfamiliar with the parlance, a lunker is an unusually large fish, also known as a whopper. Astonished, I glanced down and could have sworn that big old trout seemed glad to see me. Looking over at Baker, all he did was give me one of his "I told you so" looks. Dumbfounded, all I could say was, "Wow." Baker then said, "I think only the biggest and oldest fish are influenced by the old Native American knowledge." Next, Barry took my picture holding that trophy brown, and as is our custom, I carefully put the fish back in the water. Later that evening, I bought old Barry Baker dinner at Polly's Diner in Fort Smith. And over mashed potatoes, homemade meatloaf, and moonshine, he told me the secret magic word he'd gotten from the old shaman. His only advice was, just be careful where you use it. Now, the real amazing part of the story happened the next summer. I was in Mystic, Connecticut, visiting my folks, and my pop and I went out on his renovated lobster boat, Hank the Buffalo, to do a little deep-sea fishing. Well, once we got about 20 miles offshore and dropped a few lines, we unfortunately found the fishing was a touch slow, so I decided to give my pop a little magic show. "Get the net," I said as I headed for the stern. Leaning over the transom, I stuck my whole head under the water and shouted the secret magic word old Barry Baker had gotten from the old Indian medicine man's into the depths. When I came back up dripping wet, my pop was looking at me as if I'd lost my mind. In response, I just smiled and said, "Just wait, this usually takes a few seconds to work." Giddy with anticipation, I'd been certain a big old flounder or at least a plump mackerel would have heard my call. But after almost a minute, nothing had happened. That's when I realized we were in several hundred feet of water, out on the vast open North Atlantic, and it slowly dawned on me there were other creatures lurking in the depths besides game fish, and began wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. A moment later it happened. There was a ruckus. Water was flying everywhere, and then a loud crunch. When I finally opened my eyes, I'll never forget what I saw. It must have been a 2,000-pound squid flopped over the boat's smashed cabin, and my was Pop standing there shaking his head, holding that obviously inadequate net. Needless to say, calling that school bus-sized squid a lunker would have been an understatement. Mind you, the Leviathan did seem glad to see us, but unfortunately, my pop just wasn't particularly overjoyed to see that squid. Well, it took some doing, but we finally got that slimy monster back in the water. When we were done, my pop and I were covered in the foul-smelling goo, and the damage to the cabin looked much worse without the unexpected guest. As should be expected, I spent the next few days helping my pop put a new roof on Hank's cabin. As we worked, he insisted on an explanation, so I had to tell him about old Barry Baker, the old Indian medicine man, and the secret magic word. along with my ill-conceived desire to liven up the fishing. It had been awkward few days. After explaining how I magically managed to get a 2,000-pound squid to crush his boat, my pop gave me the same lecture he did when I was a kid about thinking before opening my mouth. Personally, I was just glad we weren't in a rowboat. Since then, I've been very careful about where I use the secret magic word old Bobber Barry Baker had gotten off that old Indian medicine man, learning that some words, in some places, are best left unsaid. Now, as a special bonus gift to all my faithful readers, I'm going to share the secret magic word, so you too can catch the biggest fish in any water. The magic word is Kalamantuchapek, pronounced Kalamantuchipik. It's an old Blackfoot word that translates as, "Come hither, big brother." For the best results, this ancient enchanted fish call is most effective when your head is completely submerged and seems to be most productive in extremely cold water. This has something to do with acoustics. If you failed to achieve the desired results on your first attempt, it merely means there were no exceptionally large fish in the immediate vicinity, and you should simply try again at another location. If after 2 or 3 dozen tries and you're still not having any enormous fish jump into your arms, the problem may be with your pronunciation. In that case, it is recommended to practice at home in a tub of ice water. Good luck, and do be careful where you use the secret magic word.